As Russia's invasion of Ukraine drones on for another year, the death toll mounts, with the war-torn country warning its European allies that its soldiers are keeping Russia off Europe's doorstep. So what can Europe learn from the bloodshed, particularly when it comes to manpower? My name is Angela Skujins. This is TVP World, and I'm joined here in our Brussels studio by Emmanuel Jacob. He is the president of the European Organisation of Military Associations and Trade Unions. Hi, Emmanuel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
So we're often reminded that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has exposed the changing nature of warfare, particularly the importance of drones. Is winning a war in 2025 about technological innovation or about manpower?
Well, honestly, if I could answer you concretely on that and with 100% sure, then I would win a prize. Nobody could believe before the invasion from Russia in Ukraine in 2022 how things would change. We were not preparing for these kind of wars. Okay, there were signs and war is more technological than it was ever before. But the way that things developed in Ukraine, was really a big change now. And you see this in the armed forces. Armed forces are now, together with industry and the European Union, NATO, are now looking for how to prepare for this war which is going on, but not at our doorstep yet in Brussels.
Absolutely. What other lessons has Europe learnt from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, particularly when it comes to soldiers and infantry and things like that?
Well, I think that Europe, and this is a bit difficult to say, I'm not sure that Europe already learned a lot of lessons. But of course, we have the member states. The European Union sees now that things need to change. That is a lesson that they learned. Because the discussion on a future European defense, a defense union, or whatever you want to call it, this is already going on since a long time. But to be honest, it was more a kind of political discussion. It was a debate going on between believers and non-believers of European defense. What the European Union learned now, what whole Europe, even outside the European Union, sees now very clearly, that is, if we don't join our forces, that we will be lost for the future. And that's why so many things are coming on the table now, as well industry related, as defense forces as such related.
Yes, and you mentioned coming together. The EU will soon unveil their Military Mobility Act. This is to enable tanks to cross borders with more ease, as well as trains holding ammunition. Who is going to build that? What kind of manpower is necessary for the military mobility to be scaled up?
Yeah, it is, of course, today, 2025, a bit a shame if I would say that's what we told you before. Because military mobility is not a discussion that suddenly appeared after February 2022. There was already a debate on military mobility before. We had already in 2018 the first discussion, and then systems were changed in between. What we see today is that finally the European Union, and I hope also the member states, understand that if we don't make this very clear for the future, that we have a huge problem if one day the Russians don't stop anymore at the Ukraine borders or in the middle of Ukraine and going into Poland, into the Baltic states, into Romania or whatever. Everybody expects that tomorrow they will not be in Brussels, but nobody expected at a certain moment that they would go to Kiev. And Ukraine could stop then. But military mobility is something which is absolutely needed to work on. There was an exercise going on in Romania in the past days. And also there, they have already some lessons learned from how do we bring our people in peacetime to Romania. And they already had a problem by train, for example. What they said is it went quite well. It took time, but by road and then by planes, because it was organized. And there is no wartime for the moment, but trains were still a problem. So we need to work on that.
If we look at particularly at Romania, at that exercise that you just mentioned, how long do you think it will take for military mobility in Romania to be scaled up to fend off any aggression, not particularly Russian aggression, but an aggression that they were preparing for?
I don't have correct figures on a country like Romania, but I think it will take today quite some time, and with quite some time I mean that you could be happy that first forces really deployed, that this is done within a month and a half, but this will be very small number of forces. If you really for an invasion or for a threat close to the border would deploy, I think it will cost you quite some time. We are not ready for it.
Absolutely. And last month, news broke that the United States would be pulling out some of their troops from NATO, from Europe's eastern flank, particularly Romania. Does Europe have the numbers to fill that gap, as well as the skilled military personnel required to protect Europe's eastern border?
No. Unfortunately, I have to say no. We don't have it. In the past years, in our debates, I said quite often, we have two kinds of countries when it comes to recruitment and also to retention. Now, the countries that say we don't have a problem, and then the countries that say we have a problem, but we don't speak about it. So we were pushing since quite a while this whole recruitment and retention problem away, but it exists. It exists in all European countries. We have there a problem. We try to bring it in a discussion on the European level. We had one meeting with the EU Military Committee. There was also a meeting with NATO, with human resources specialists, which is a good thing. It means that they all accept that there is a problem. But how it will continue, that's the big question mark. Anyway, with what we have today, and not only in the defense forces, also in the industry sector of defense, we will have a problem preparing ourselves to be ready in 2030, because that's anyway the target that everybody sets now self. By 2030, we need to be ready in case of a problem with Russia. In the way that we are going, we will not be ready with the manpower we have.
What are the big gaping issues? You're talking about problems hitting that 2030 target if Russia tests Europe's borders. What are the biggest issues when it comes to Europe becoming fighting fit by that deadline?
Well, I think we already mentioned most of the things. It's the manpower. We are missing the manpower.
Is it a matter of numbers, like just not having enough people, or the right skilled people, funding?
It's a combination. And I'm a little bit afraid when I say it's a combination that with the discussions that are going on for the moment, that perhaps we're going to fill up more numbers, but we are not convinced that filling up numbers will also give us the correct trained and capable manpower. What do I mean? I mean the debate which is going on in some countries on conscription again. I'm a believer in conscription in countries that still have conscription today and then make changes. But a country that has no longer conscription since 10, 20 years, starting again with conscription in a period where you already have a lack of military personnel, where you have no longer barracks available, where you need to invest in more equipment, because bringing 10,000 young people in, this means also you need to equip 10,000 and you need to train 10,000 people and bring them into barracks. We simply don't have that anymore. The cost will be too high. It will take too much time. So if you want to clean numbers, bring conscription in. But if you really want to have military manpower and girl power, then you need to do something else. And you need to make sure that, for example, defense forces are an attractive working environment. That's one of the conditions.
Absolutely. And in recent days, we also saw Germany announce voluntary military service after failing to get conscription. Is that a country that you were making reference to?
Yeah, okay. Now finally, they took what I heard in the last days, a decision on not bringing conscription back in, but conscription is still behind the door, apparently. If you look to this country, to Belgium, the first, I think 149,000 letters are out telling to people, okay, join us for an information session. And if you're interested, and you are capable, medically okay, you can join a kind of a year where we train you to become a soldier. It's on voluntary basis. You will be paid, and then fill that up for the reserve in the future. That could be a solution. And I think it's also a bit in this way that Germany is willing to go. But they still keep conscription behind the door.
But how do these soldiers and, these volunteers, how would they fare against Russian soldiers? Russian soldiers have been doing this for years now. Is there concern that if Russia tests Europe's borders by 2030, that Europe's soldiers and infantry and military personnel could not perhaps measure up to the Russian standard, which seems to be, they're battle tested, they've been doing this for a long time?
That's of course the danger. Now the question is, what you just said, is this also correct that Russia has these troops? And is it correct that Russians are well trained, that they have this experience? What I think, but I cannot prove it, is that Russia is also fighting this problem internally and brings more and more people to the front line, which are really not well trained and well equipped, and are surely not there to defend their country, but they are just taken there. So it could be out of balance if there is a confrontation, but on the other hand, we don't have to turn around. If you don't train people on a permanent basis and prepare them for such a war situation, yeah, there is a question mark if we will be ready. But honestly, there is no choice. It's not will or not. The question is, we will have to do it. Because one day something will happen again. I don't know if the Russians will be there in 2030. Nobody knows. Everybody can predict. But we need to prepare, we need to be ready. It's not a choice, it's an obligation.
Absolutely. And stepping back from the front lines now, perhaps looking at factories, is there enough industrial production capacity in Europe to supply the right munitions, weapons to those soldiers on the front lines to defend Europe?
Yeah, that's of course the second part of the whole debate which is going on. We had now already a flow of discussions from the European Commission and with the Council, with the European Parliament. But honestly, I think it's time to deliver now. There was a lot of debate going on. We expect now again in the weeks to come some decisions. But it's time now to really deliver. Of course, our industry says we are ready. But we also heard that there is also a workers' problem in defense industry. Even if I heard last week in another debate, somebody from industry saying, but okay, we try to take our measures and make sure that we can form people. This whole thing should be a combination between defense forces, defense industry, education in the countries. If we don't start working already during education time and prepare people, I don't say that everybody needs to prepare as a soldier or as a future working in defense industry, but there are countries working in mid-schools, for example, and have this orientation, security defense sector. So I think this is something we should continue to do, because otherwise we will not be ready.
Absolutely. And I'm just picking up on a thread from before. You mentioned girl power as well as manpower. What role can women play when it comes to Europe's military rearmament? Is their inclusion on par with the ramp up?
First of all, women play an important role in defense forces and in security. There is no doubt about it. That's very clear. We still have a recruitment problem and a problem with the number of women that join the armed forces. It still is, I think, in global something in the European Union around 10 to 12%, with some only at 4, some other ones at 20. But also there, it's the same as I said before. We need to make sure that we have an environment in defense forces that is open for having women in defense forces, and not only women. So this means that we have to work much more on diversity and inclusion in our armed forces. And I know the academical debate on that looks quite good, and then we say we do better. Of course, we do better now than we did 30 years before. It would be a shame if we don't. But the environment in defense forces is still a problem for women, for LGBTI people, from people from color. It depends a little bit on the countries, but we can do much better than we do for the moment.
Would you say it's getting worse or better, female participation in the defence and military sectors?
Well, for a very long time, I would say we are going better. But if I look today in our defence forces and I look to discussions that we have with several of our colleagues, we are not doing so well. What we hear from several from our people that are really with their 2 feet day to day in defence forces and seeing the reality, they say we are a little bit going back. We are going back in time, meaning that discussion on diversity, inclusion, gender, but also in our case, social dialogue, collective bargaining in armed forces is getting on a lower level than it was before. And what we believe is that this has to do with the fact that military leadership sometimes, perhaps also influenced by politics, it's a bit a question mark for us, that they put now at the first place this operational target, which I understand. That's why we have our armed forces. But we cannot have only our armed forces if we don't make sure that we also have the number of men and women in the armed forces. And I repeat what I already said twice, we need to have a very good working environment, and otherwise it will be a disaster to continue.
US President Donald Trump has been quite vocal on his positions of diversity and inclusion strategies. Do you think that he's shaping the dialogue or impacting female or gender diverse people's participation in the military and defence sectors in Europe?
What I don't believe, but you never know in these days, but I don't believe that there are directives coming from the US, not written directives, but kind of orders like, okay, don't talk about gender anymore, don't talk about diversity anymore. There are other things to do, but it influences. We see that it influences. Our European defence forces take quite quickly over this idea on, I know with women it can be problematic. We are not at the point yet as we have seen in Washington, but it is getting close.
Women can be problematic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much for the invitation and success.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching. My name is Angela Skujins and this is TVP World. But make sure that you stick around as more news, commentary and analysis is coming up. See you next time.